sunny Friday morning. And welcome to this policy dialogue at the EPC to discuss the first 100 days of the von der Leyen Commission 2.0. I am Maurice. I'm a policy analyst here at the EPC in the European Politics and Institutions program. So formally, the 100 days of the Commission, this symbolic mark was reached last week, but we thought that to have this discussion, it would be even more interesting to wait for the white paper on defense, which was published 2 days ago. And so we have it, and we can have a better view, a better overview of what the Commission has been doing so far and is intending to do for the next 5 years. The 1st December, the day the Commission took office, seems quite far away now, almost another world. Since, of course, we had Trump arriving to the White House, we had J.D. Vance's shocking speech in Munich. We have threats on the territory of an EU member state, Greenland, and of course we have all the discussions, I dare not say negotiations, over the fate of Ukraine and of European security. But in this global context, the Commission seems to be sticking to its agenda defined last year. And actually, Ursula von der Leyen last week said that 100 days into our mandate, we stand by the European choices in the political guidelines. So the guidelines she presented last July before being elected by the European Parliament. And indeed, she said before taking office that she would present initiatives in the first month of the Commission concerning Europe's competitiveness, defense, decarbonation, agriculture. And so we have these strategies, communication, legislative proposals, but the question now is, what do these initiatives actually contain? And that's what we will discuss this morning. What do they indicate about the direction in which the Union is heading? Are they the right answers for the challenges we face? For this discussion, we will not attempt a comprehensive assessment of the Commission's action so far. 27 commissioners, 27 portfolios, and even more policy areas. So we could not cover everything today, but what we propose is to focus on 2 areas that are the priorities for this 5 years political and institutional cycle, meaning competitiveness and defense. And the one area that was the priority of the previous cycle, the Green Deal, and more generally, environment and sustainability. And we will try to see where we are with this policy priority. We will see whether and how these priorities, competitiveness, defense, and sustainability, have also an impact on other policies by the Commission and the EU in itself. To do this, I am delighted to welcome 3 of my EPC colleagues. Brooke, policy analyst in the Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program. Thank you, Brooke, for being with us. Martisiute, policy analyst also in the Europe in the World program, and Philipp Lausberg, a senior policy analyst in the Europe's Political Economy program. This event will unfold as follows. I will give the floor to Brooke, Maria, and Philipp for 2 or 3 rounds of questions, trying to cover everything or as much as we can. And then we will circulate microphones and you will be able to ask questions. We have 90 minutes, which is plenty of time to dive into these topics and to try to answer as much as comprehensively as possible your questions. So I will start with a simple question to each of our experts here. What is your takeaway for the Commission so far, the Commission's action so far in your field, in your area of expertise? What is the main proposal or the main measure so far? Or the most outlooked one, if there is any, the one we didn't pay attention to, not enough. Also the most positive or the most negative one, and I guess we would have much to discuss. So I will start with you, Maria, with the burning issue of the last few weeks, which is of course defense, with the white paper 2 days ago, the Rearm Europe or Readiness for 2030, how it is called now, the plan presented by the Commission, and of course the support to Ukraine, which is closely linked to these proposals on defense. So Maria, tell us what has been done so far in the field of defense, and of course, is it up to the challenge or is it disappointing in your perspective?
Thank you very much, Philip, and thank you all for being here today on Friday morning. A pleasure to be talking about these issues with my EPC colleagues and with you all together. So as you rightly point, on our minds right now is indeed what's happening in Europe from the point of view of defense, security, and military affairs. And ever since, the president of the commission appointed the Commissioner for Defense and Space, the mission letter stated very clearly that within the first 100 days, there will be a white paper put forward. It was, of course, set in a broader context that, it's a step towards creating European Defense Union, progressive attempt to move towards a single market for defense. So we see in some respects the first expression of that in the form of the white paper for defense, and right before that, the Rearm for Europe plan. So the paper is overall, quite balanced. I mean, depends where you're coming from. It recognizes the very volatile geopolitical environment, takes into account the most recent pivot of the US or realignment of the US towards Asia Pacific and perhaps away from Europe in general, and what is happening now within overall ceasefire debate. It proposes options in terms of how we can overcome the long-term fragmentation of European defense industry, as well as puts forward options for funding and financing. And this is, it's important to highlight that it's both public and private options being forward. So it's a good starting point. I would call it the first surge in defense. I hope it's not the last one, because while it is positive and forward-looking, there are, of course, challenges that come with it. And it really depends where you sit. If you come from Eastern Europe, maybe it could have been a bit more ambitious. Maybe it's a little bit, disappointing in terms of the amount or the time that took to propose white paper like this within 100 days. If you come from the south of Europe, perhaps this is very ambitious. Perhaps you're a bit concerned about the debts. Maybe you're missing some of the instabilities that Southern Europeans are experiencing in their neighborhood. So again, it really depends where you're coming from. My take that it's a good start. It's a first good step. Let's see how the member states will react, because what the European Commission is doing is really putting the ball in their garden, if I can say so. They are, providing certain budgetary and legal flexibilities to increase defense spending, which would not be counted towards the 3% of the budget deficit, which is good news. But now it really depends what member states are going to do, especially those that are, for example, not military aligned, like Ireland and a few others, or Austria, for example. The 150 billion joint borrowing or loans is also good news. Again, as expected, the Commission is encouraging or incentivizing member states to do this collaboratively, which is good news if we are trying to move towards gradual creation of the single market for defense. You really need economies of scale, minimization of costs, and to address, through integration, the fragmentation of our market. Now, I'm very pleased that Ukraine is very much at the heart of the white paper, because when we're talking about European defense, actually, this is where our front line is. Very often, the leaders say, oh, we have two objectives. One is to support Ukraine, another to rearm. Actually, it all starts with Ukraine, because currently Ukraine is shielding us from actual armed attack. I would go as far as to suggest that. Where I'm a bit disappointed is actually in the amounts. The commissioner himself estimated that to have a European air defense shield is estimated at 500 billion. So I think amounts could have been bolder, but again, I think it's just a starting point. Second of all is I think the key challenge will now be time. We don't have time. Time is the scarcest resource. So I would, as Kabila has highlighted, now we need to move to action implementation. I would say fast track implementation. We really need to do a lot. There's still a long way to go. I'm very much looking forward to what the EIB will put forward, which is long awaited, is massively in delay here. And what I would have liked, perhaps, and what's missing for me a little bit in the white paper is the worst case scenario, whereby the Commission is assuming that it's going to be an armed attack against EU and NATO. But I think we need to prepare also a scenario, what would we do if there is such an attack with minimal or no support from the US? I think we need to factor that in and also prepare our new defense plans in NATO with that regard as well. So that's it for me for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Maria. We'll discuss the economic dimension and the issue of funding later, but I would like to ask you about what the Commission has proposed, this flexibility in budget rules and this safe instrument to lend 150 billion to the member states, which means that these two proposals, which make the 800 billion plan, are just money that member states will need to spend, increasing their deficit or their debt. It's not money coming in through a joint borrowing, as some member states, especially Spain or France, are still demanding. So what has been the reactions of the member states? Do you think that most of them will be willing to use this flexibility and to use this debt money? Or, as you stress the factor of time, and that time is limited, do we need something more bold to motivate the member states to increase their defense spending? Is it the right approach for now?
Well, the way I would answer that is, the Commission is relaxing the rules. It will be a mixed picture overall. Some countries have already, despite the relaxation of these budget rules, have already been investing in defense very significantly, like Poland, for example, the Baltic states, the Scandinavians. I think Germany in this regard is a very good example. I think Germany is setting a good example for the rest of Europe, and if I can say Western Europe and Southern Europe, by, revisiting its debt break within its constitution, so that if you invest in defense, anything above 1% will be excluded towards the budget deficit, which is great news. They're also creating this 500 billion infrastructure fund, which is absolutely key enabler for defense. I mean, the Commission has always said, defense is the primary responsibility of the member states. You member states keep saying that we're not doing enough. Well, here we go. I'm giving you that opportunity. Come and show me that you're committed. And indeed, what it requires is commitment from the member states, from national authorities, from the industry, from civil society. And I think overall it will be a mixed picture. Now, I think also that it's easier for it's more meant perhaps for bigger member states, the relaxation of the budget deficit, and the 150 billion is also, countries need to have a good lending capacity in order to make use of loans. And in this regard, it's welcome that the Commission is coming forward and saying, I have your back. I'm going to take those loans. I'm going to guarantee you can pay me later. It comes with the strings attached. But it's also another opportunity for the countries with different lending capacities to make use of it. Cohesion funds, again, the midterm review of the Cohesion Fund. This is something specifically targeting the cohesion countries, where indeed, from the regional point of view and territorial cohesion, security will be more streamlined, and defense industries will be able to benefit from that fund as well. So it remains to be seen. But I gather it will be a bit of a mixed picture. You're absolutely right. It's not fresh money. In fact, you could even argue, is there money? It's not like there's money in the bank account. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind that can we do so much within this MFF? Because ultimately the idea here is to prepare the grounds for the next MFF as well. So this is where I believe the Commission will be putting forward more money. And now it's trying to bridge the two MFFs, if I can say so, and the urgency that we're facing. Thank you.
Very interesting. Thanks, Maria. So speaking about money, I turn to you, Philipp. Competitiveness has been presented as what I would describe as the overarching priority for the EU, with a new sense of urgency after the IRA of the Biden administration, with the election, the second election of Donald Trump, but also with the reports last year of Enrico Letta and even more Mario Draghi. And when the college arrived, the first big text that von der Leyen presented was the competitiveness compass, which she said would be the North Star of the new commission. So the same question as I asked to Maria, what is the most important thing that you can take out of these proposals and others, of course, because it's not the only proposal made by the Commission regarding competitiveness, the economy, or the industry. Is it the right direction after 100 days? What do we see for the future? Yes, what is your assessment so far?
So yeah, I think it's definitely the right direction. The question is, does the Commission actually have the means to go through with a lot of these plans? So it's about finance, of course, and also if it can actually, go through with the regulatory burden slashing that everyone expects now, and finally also there's a lot of hope in more single market in strategic areas, but also reducing barriers in existing markets where there hasn't been done enough in the past, and whether it can live up to that's the big question. And I think, but in general, I think the move that we've seen from sort of the last commission that was very much about regulating, towards now a greater emphasis on industrial policy, on also assertive trade policy, but and finally also at least an attempt to do more strategic investments. That is a good thing. The competitiveness compass, as you say, is the so-called North Star. It sort of bundles all of these initiatives. It's very ambitious. It's about 40 different strategies and new acts that are proposed over the next 4 or 5 years. They are all more or less in 3 areas. So it's about innovation, it's about competitive decarbonization, and resilience/security. These are all very ambitious acts, as I said, but they really crucially depend on the so-called what the Commission calls horizontal enablers. So simplification, deepening of the single market, financing, skills promotion, and policy coordination. And as I said before, I think the first 3 are decisive, and I don't see that much how the Commission will actually get to achieve its goals. So on red tape, I mean, we've seen the 2 omnibuses coming out. I mean, they were quite ambitious already, and I think the pressure that has been accumulating from the business community, but also from member states and from abroad, I mean, having the US example, for example, has really shown that there is more ambition now. I think in general, the approach that the Commission is taking is really to go through the acquis, reduce by 25% the burden. It's the right approach. But there is, of course, limits at how much you can slash, because if you want to really slash a lot, you probably would have to deregulate, and that is something that is difficult, and it's probably not what we want, because I mean, it's also bad for business if you constantly change expectations by slashing. The EU needs to steer policy more than ever now, with considering the international situation. We need more coordination, so for that, regulation is important. And usually what happens if you get rid of EU regulation, you get more national regulation, and that is going to create even more red tape. So So there are limits at what is achievable, and I think the Commission needs to be honest about that, and that I don't always see. What I believe should be the three sort of ways how you can reduce the regulatory burden, and that is also something the Commission, of course, is pushing, but I think then there's more ambition needed. The first one is, accelerate administrative and reporting process and cut compliance costs by using more digital tools. And there is the European Business Wallet proposal, but I think from the past initiatives of the EU, I mean, they've been ambitious, but they haven't really delivered. So I think they really need to accelerate here and do more, because that is a way of reducing burdens without actually reducing ambition of policy. Then the proportionality of regulation needs to be fixed. I mean, especially SMEs and mid-caps. Mid-caps is sort of the forgotten middle of the European economic fabric that is extremely important for innovation, for growth, especially in strategic areas. Those are the hidden champions, but also the scale-ups. They are still, regulated by large companies. How do you want to, achieve more competitiveness if your most high potential companies are treated the worst? So there is something to be done. The Commission has announced they will introduce a small mid-cap category we will know more about that next month, but I think that is not ambitious enough. That goes to 500 employees. We need something like a larger mid-cap category, I believe, that goes up to maybe 1,000 or even 3,000. That would really capture these most high potential companies and really, relieve the burden and get them really to push European competitiveness. And then the deepening of the single market, as I said before, I mean, that's one of the best means to slash the regulatory burden. You have 27 different rules and you can replace them by one European one. I mean, that is quite impactful. And of course, the Commission will announce or propose their single market plan in June. It has already said that it will focus on better enforcement. Great, but how is it going to happen? You need more staff for that usually. So I think what they should do is more concentrate on more strategic cases to make sure the ones that are important for, strategic goals like competitiveness, that they're, pushed or put forward. Particularly then, the harmonization push that it wants to do on especially strategic markets, energy, defense, connectivity, professions, finance. I mean, these are absolutely key for competitiveness. And also the 28th regime, great proposal, but I think it's really, it really depends on the member states here. And that's the only thing the Commission can do, I think, is really to reach out more to national parliaments, to the council, to really underline the importance of that. And I think member states have understood it, but it's really about horse trading in the end, and then about national prerogatives that people don't want to give up. And then the second big problematic area, I think, of the competitiveness compass and all of the competitiveness agenda is that it lacks a conclusive plan how to finance all this industrial policy actions that inspired by Draghi are in the plans of the Commission. So 800 billion additional investment per year is what Draghi says. I don't see where that's supposed to come from. And, it's nice to propose a savings and investment union strategy. I think there's some good elements in it. It's nothing really new. I think it really depends on the individual strategies and acts that are going to be put out in the next few years, what this will mean in practice. But in the end of the day, I mean, financial markets are of course crucial. We see that in the US, where they are the big motor behind their growth model. But for them to work, I mean, you need a reorientation of funding, and you need a cultural shift. I mean, it's not that Europeans overnight will suddenly all invest in stocks and bonds instead of putting their money on the bank. So I think that is something that needs to be borne in mind, and I think there is a lot that can be done here, but expectations shouldn't be too high. So then having that in mind, the Commission seems to rely mainly on state aid to push their industrial policy and the competitiveness agenda. And there, I mean, coordination, of course, is key. And they talked about introducing this competitiveness coordination tool, again, inspired by Draghi. How that will look like if member states will be on board, that's not clear yet. What is clear, however, is that you have very limited and highly uneven member state fiscal space. And so you cannot finance all of these ambitions just by member state financing. I think it's illusional to think so. And of course, if given the unevenness and the big countries, I mean, you mentioned the German packages now. I mean, there's of course a danger that if you have the big countries investing more than the others, that undermines the single market. And the single market, as we all know, is the biggest asset of the European Union when it comes to its economy. So that is a dangerous move to go. So what needs to be done is really to, channel the existing EU money and also, crowd in more private finance, but also use the money that is lying around that is not being used more effectively. And here, I mean, the MFF communication that was put out a couple of weeks ago gave us a bit of an idea that the Commission has understood that the investment interest architecture as it exists now it's too fragmented. There are too many programs. It's too complex. There's not enough flexibility to react to crises. There's not enough focus really to strategic areas where the real EU value added can be provided. And that is something that we need to see in the competitiveness fund that the Commission is promising. We don't know what it's going to look like, but this is going to be really decisive. And it will also need to show how you can increase leverage, but at the same time increase the risk alleviation capacity that's needed to really boost those strategic areas like deep tech and clean tech, where you need a lot of risk alleviation because the current VC and private financing is just not risk averse enough. So that will be the challenge, to really build this competitiveness fund right. But of course, it's also limited. Without additional funding, it won't be able to make such a difference, I think. So you need to look at using unused resources more. I mean, the ESM, for example, is a huge pot of money lying around. I mean, there's discussions about using that for defense. That's what Fabian Zulek, the EPCCO, and I have pleaded for in a paper. But also, there's 380 billion in called but not used RRF money. I mean, that should be used for industrial policy or maybe defense. I think then you have European promotional banks that have staggering amounts of money that could be used more in favor of European strategic goals. But also, I think we need to attract more money from abroad. And you have, for example, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund that is huge, but only invests about 17 and 18% in Europe. I mean, these are things where we can still do, draw more money into the EU, I believe. And there are more ideas I could decide now, but I think I'll leave it at that for now.
Thank you. So we understand clearly that we are looking for alternatives to public funding because of limited resources of the member states. I would like to know more about this savings and investments union, which is seen as complementary to these options like EIB or strategic funds or this kind of instruments. Until now, for a decade, we used to hear about the unions of capital markets. So now it's the savings and investments union. Is it just a rebranding, or what the Commission has put forward this week? Is it something new? Is it more ambitious? Is it wider in scope? Is it different in nature, or is it just the same under another name?
It's essentially rebranding. I mean, I think it was sort of Letta's idea to sort of make it more palatable to people, because it sounds just more nicer than capital markets union. If you talk to the average, to people who are not really into finance, it sounds better, but I think what it contains, the strategy, is nothing, essentially not a lot of new things in there. I mean, it's more or less three strands. One is about savings and trying to get people to invest more in strategic areas, to mobilize savings, because we have, I think, half of the savings, or it's 8 trillion or something, is lying on bank accounts. You could use it more for productive investments. So that's about financial literacy, but also security, or making sure investments are better protected. So that is, there's some initiatives there. Then it's about companies actually investing or getting more investments through capital markets, getting listed and things like that. The Listing Act, for example, but that's nothing new. It's been around for a while. It just needs to be actually implemented. Then I think the key issues then are supervision and harmonization, and those ones are really dependent on member states. And it's about harmonizing insolvency law, tax law. We had this on the table a year ago in the council, and nothing much happened because member states were against it. Also, when it comes to supervision, which is the small but small states with an important financial center, they're not like Luxembourg, Estonia, Ireland. They're not really ready to give up supervision to ESMA in Paris, the European supervisor. So, but I mean, the Commission seems to be a little bit less ambitious even on that one, I think, because now it's more about harmonizing national approaches, and only some of those areas to be then given more European authority. I think it really depends on member states moving. So the Commission can't do much, if you ask me.
Thanks. Now, Brooke, Green Deal, sustainability. So it was maybe not the North Star of the last mandate, but the star of the last mandate, the Green Deal. And now we see a backlash in public opinion, and also coming from some member states, governments. The omnibus, not deregulation, but at least simplification, was seen as something going against this ambition, this climate ambition. So my first question would be, is it really the case? And looking at what the Commission has put forward for now, do you agree with this general idea that we are seeing some kind of backtracking on climate and environmental ambitions from the EU?
Yeah, thank you. My prognosis definitely addresses that. And I mean, yes. Clean Industrial Deal, I mean, as you say, I think it is for this von der Leyen Commission as the Green Deal was for the previous. It's kind of had that same star power, and it's really setting the tone, and that's one of industrial competitiveness and decarbonization, facilitated through these drivers of simplification, drastically scaled up investment, etc. I want to focus, the omnibus simplification package is an important one, and I'll get to that when I kind of the state of play and challenges. But I think it's first really important, if we're talking about whether or not we're seeing this kind of backtracking, I want to point out, if maybe not overlooked policy, but the proposal for 2040 climate targets, which are frankly just missing. This was ambitiously proposed 90% reduction by 2040. The proposal for this was expected to be published alongside the Clean Industrial Deal, and it was not. And I think that this mission is incredibly important to shine a light to, because it's a mission. Industrial transformation needs to be done within the confines and driven by these climate targets, not the other way around, not having climate targets being dictated or driven by competitiveness concerns and industry interest. And it's a mission alongside examples of corporate capture within various, several of the initiatives that we've seen so far within this commission. Indicates, unfortunately to me, a kind of harbinger for this greater sustainability and the future of the Green Deal within this next commission, indicating, as you indicate, backtracking. Within this vein, there are several challenges or tensions rather that are pretty apparent, and this kind of gets into the omnibus simplification package. As we've talked about, if we're talking about scaling up public and private finance, this is kind of murky. unclear on how this will necessarily be done. But Omnibus 1 and 2 really aim to decrease corporate sustainability reporting and due diligence requirements. And to me, this is quite a grave error. If we're talking about, in the sense of financing, this creates a bit of an unstable landscape for investment. On the one hand, you're decreasing data availability and comparability that helps channel investment towards sustainable initiatives. Moreover, as Philipp alluded to earlier, I mean, it's diminishing the regulatory stability that kind of attracts long-term capital necessary. From a sustainability perspective, let's say, I mean, it risks a race to the bottom where we are rewarding laggards instead of those who are at the forefront and kind of relying more on these voluntary measures, which history has shown are not sufficient to really meet these ambitious climates that we need to meet. So that's my stance on the omnibus simplification package. Another challenge, I think, is this, let's say, greater reliance on carrots, so short-term incentives, market-based incentives, but not necessarily being paired, or it's being paired with a paring down of these sticks. So for example, the Vision for Agriculture kind of abandons SUR in this stricter stance on pesticide regulation, instead pushing for innovation and encouraging the uptake of biopesticides. Similarly, the action plan on the automotive sector aims to weaken the 2025 standards for cars and vans. So that's another tension. And I think the last challenge I'll highlight is just the general scope of what we're seeing. I mean, the Clean Industrial Deal is really setting the tone, and it's compared to the Green Deal. I mean, decarbonization is essential, but there are so many different facets of sustainability that are falling off of the wagon. I mean, if we're talking about the environment and general climate resilience, I mean, this is biodiversity, nature protection. Again, going back to the Vision for Agriculture, I mean, biodiversity and nature protection is barely addressed within this vision. This is also an issue with regards to social. I mean, union of skills is great, and this quality jobs roadmap, again, great, but the social dimension has been limited to this competitiveness component, and people, of course, are more than their skills and jobs, and health, etc., has really fallen off the wagon. Moreover, the Just Transition Fund, this was identified in the political guidelines as being, not only necessary, but plans of increasing funding. That has, I mean, the Commission has been pretty silent on that ever since. So, yeah.
So you mentioned this new flexibility for the automotive sector. Another important sector for the EU is the agriculture, and we have this new vision for agriculture, which was published after a dialogue with the stakeholders. So what is the state of play in this area? Are we seeing also some kind of backtracking compared to the ambitions in terms of linking agriculture to more environmental concerns and involving much more the farmers into these green policies and climate transition? What are we seeing there?
Yeah, definitely. I think it can be seen as very much adhering or leaning more into the farmer side of things and less so on the food and nature. Not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we saw with the farmers' protests that this how the far right was kind of able to capitalize on genuine feelings of hardship. And so there are a lot of positives from this vision when it comes to income and job stability, but the lack of focus and drive when it comes to nature, when it comes to biodiversity, is incredibly short-sighted. Moreover, when we're talking about the resilience of this sector, I mean, biodiversity underpins the longevity of food security within the EU. So in that regard, it is nearsighted. I think, of course, this is another example of kind of this shift towards the right and this pandering, let's say, to corporate. I mean, again, I'll go back to SUR and the abandoning of pesticide regulation. I mean, that's a clear case of corporate capture, in my opinion. And unfortunately, it is to the detriment of human health as well, to the quality of water, etc.
So after this first round of question, the kind of state of play in your areas, I would like to go more into the links or contradictions between the different policies. So one obvious question that comes is, Philipp mentioned industrial policy, and decarbonation is part of the competitiveness compass. So how do you see from this sustainability perspective the inclusion of decarbonation in the competitiveness compass, while you seems to be saying that there is a contradiction between the overall competitiveness policy and the green objectives? And I would ask the same question from the other side of the discussion to Philipp, and then we'll go back to defense. So Brooke and Philipp.
Okay, I'm not a complete pessimist. I mean, decarbonization is integral, right? I mean, this is a very important, it is very, I would say, I would commend the Commission for its prioritization of this, looking at decarbonization as one side of the coin to competitiveness. And I also would commend this emphasis on heavy industry and clean tech, because these are crucial actors, and without them, I mean, I don't think we will be able to achieve climate neutrality. I think it's more the flip side of this. So the recognition that climate resilience and, let's say, environment, nature, et cetera, and social, beyond decarbonization, and the need for these to realize competitiveness and security goals. And for me, this is the most apparent when we look at, let's say, adaptation. I mean, even the Ninista report highlighted climate change as a massive security threat when we were talking about food, energy, system, et cetera. And the EU risk assessment at the same time also highlighted how woefully underprepared for the impacts of climate change we are. I mean, we're seeing it already with the disasters. I mean, they're starting to hit within the billions. And so adaptation has loosely been mentioned here and there. It was sprinkled in the political guidelines, again, from the security narrative, which, to be honest, I actually think is quite a positive thing, because it is a security threat. It is a competitiveness threat. And there will be an adaptation plan that will be introduced at the beginning of next year. But I think that there are a lot of challenges here. On the one hand, adaptation is a local issue, so we get into this question of what role can and should the EU play. But at the end of the day, it all goes back to finance, unfortunately, right? And adaptation, there is a massive implementation gap and there is a massive financing gap. And when we're talking about risk and return, unfortunately, adaptation is not the most desirable to be, let's say, pushing your money towards. And so it relies heavily on public funding. And again, we've highlighted all of the challenges that there are within that. So it gets into these questions of, let's say, more innovative or creative financing. We could talk about a really interesting topic, I think, when it's, within this realm of competitiveness and our ability, let's say, to bounce back after disasters. I think the role of the EU as a public insurer is a really interesting debate. I don't mean insuring nature, but yeah, EU as a public insurer. But no, they're definitely two sides of the coin.
So Philipp, competitiveness and sustainability, partners or rivals?
I think partners, they should be, and I think it's also what there's a lot of change in branding now that we've been seeing that really tries to show that especially the clean energy transition is indispensable for competitiveness and also for security. And I think that is a good rebranding in many ways, because you just take more people on board for this, and it really also can convince constituencies that before weren't necessarily that much in favor of clean energy. So if you look at how the high energy price is one of the key obstacles to more competitiveness. So and we all know that if you have renewables at scale, that this can reduce substantially the energy price. Of course, the way there is hard, and you need some bridge technologies and things like that. But essentially, that should be the way forward if you want to have a low energy price. Also, I think when it comes to clean tech technology and EVs, I mean, this is we see that other countries, like especially China, but also the US under the IRA, have done a lot there, and that this is the future. So I mean, if you want to stay competitive, you can't just continue driving. I don't think Germany, for example, will be able to sell the same amount of combustion engine cars in 10 years as they did 10 years ago. It's illusional. So there's a lot of sort of technological advance that Europe cannot lose out on if they want to, that go hand in hand with sustainability. And then finally, I think the security aspect shouldn't be underestimated either. So if you look at where we got with our dependence on Russian gas, I mean, it didn't turn out that well. And to replace that by, US shale gas with Trump in power, I think it's not a good idea either. We make ourselves, we can be blackmailed very easily. And so it's essential to move away from these sources of energy, not just because they're good for the bad for the climate, which is of course a key reason, but also because of security considerations. And also if you look at other initiatives that are maybe not just the climate, but about the climate, but look at the circular economy initiatives. I think that is also key for competitiveness, for security. If you can reuse, critical raw materials and things that are already in the union. So instead of getting them from unreliable partners, or like for example, the rare earths from China, we've seen how they used that as a means of pressurizing Japan or other countries. But also it can turn out cheaper as well to reuse materials. So yeah, I think this is I think it's a good development to really show that these synergies exist, because they do, and they make it easier to also get more people on board for decarbonization.
Maria, to try to link defense and security with climate or green policies, I saw that Spain was unhappy that defense linked to addressing climate change or adaptation, they would not be covered by the budget flexibility granted by the Commission, because they argue that climate is a security risk and should be included into this defense spending. So
indeed,
how do you interpret that from your defense experts' perspective? And also, do you have a reaction to what Brooke and Philipp said?
Absolutely, thank you. Indeed, Sanchez was saying, in fact, that he would like defense to be broader in terms of its definition in general. And it's true, there's military defense, there's civil defense, there's R&D defense. This is why I'm also awaiting the EU preparedness union strategy, because it's very important when we talk.
Come next week.
Exactly, 26th. Yeah. Because indeed, when we are talking about defense and security, it should be comprehensive defense and security approach in Europe. It's of course hardcore security, in a traditional sense, but there's also hybrid threats. There's also climate threats, as we've seen floods in Valencia. So I think it makes sense what he's putting forward. Also, I think that definition should be incorporated in terms of NATO defense spending. When we're talking about 2% or perhaps 3.5% or perhaps 5%, I think there should be openness to considering what proportion of that should be military, hardcore capabilities, what percent of it should be actually civil defense. Maybe we should have such thresholds, because what the NISA report is putting forward is actually will also require a lot of funding, and also in terms of civil preparedness. Now, to come back to your question, defense and security is absolutely key for Europe's competitiveness. In fact, in Draghi report, I think it's mentioned that in 2022, the defense sector's contribution to the overall turnover in our economies is in the order of about 130 billion euros. And indeed, with new proposals that are coming forward in terms of the white paper, but also REARM Europe plan, Europe will be enhancing its manufacturing capacities. It has to. We need more military factories, which will result in creation of jobs and growth in our economy. And this is important when we talk about security, to have that competitiveness angle, because it's not just providing safety and deterring the aggressor, which is a very important key element. It's also enhancing the attractiveness of our single market, be able to compete, because ultimately the European defense industrial technological base, we want to buy more European. We haven't done that for decades, and well, it's due to the war in Ukraine, so to say, that this weakness has been exposed to this grave extent. So there's short-term consideration and longer term in terms of where we are purchasing defense equipment and weapons from. Now, on decarbonization, true, defense is not the greenest of sectors. I think it's responsible for about, not that much, maybe 1% of greenhouse gas emissions globally. There are discussions and ways to increase decarbonization in defense. There are alternative fuels. For example, in Sweden, Gripen, the fighter jets, they could be 100% run on synthetic fuels. But ultimately, it is indeed hard to capture. If you need to run a tank, you have to run a tank. You want its ultimate purpose is, to deter, to perhaps defend you rather than just meet the climate objectives. So there are also discussions in terms of ships, to what extent it could be, the lights could be lead equipped. But ultimately, you want, the objective is to deter the aggressor or to safeguard the populations. And in addition to that, to contribute, of course, to environmental standards. So I think when it comes to defense, innovation is very important, and new technologies, clean technologies. So we need to think about warfare in 10, 15, 20 years from now, what that would look like, to try to, combine conventional warfare capabilities, but also new tech as much as possible. That's AI, that's quantum, electronic warfare. So it's important. What is very much in all of our actually areas that we are covering is the Europeanization of the security of supply. We've seen that during COVID, where there was a bottleneck in terms of masks or even sanitizers, for hands. I mean, that would be absolutely deadly also in case of war. So we need to anticipate better the security of supply. We need to also, store somewhere the spare parts as well. So there's a lot of indeed work to be done in that regard. And yeah, the challenge is to do it with very limited time and deliver on all these fronts.
So listening to three of you, we see that at least in the texts, but also in the proposals, all these aspects are linked or interlinked, which brings to my mind two ideas that the EPC is repeating in different publications. The first one being breaking the silos in policymaking, and the second one, making choices, having trade-offs between policies. So looking at the different things put on the table in your respective areas, do you see a genuine break of policymaking silos? Are all dimensions being taken into account in each proposals? And the second question, or a difficult one, is what kind of trade-offs do you see already, and are they the right ones? So I don't know who wants to start with this. Brooke?
I mean, I think yes. I think, let's go with decarbonization. You can see it really ingrained within these different aspects. I mean, even if we're talking about foreign policy, there's this increased recognition of the role of green diplomacy, et cetera. But I'll actually answer this by going back to something that Maria had said. And it's about this transition from, let's say, a civil protection mechanism to a civil defense mechanism, which I actually think is an interesting idea. I think if we're talking about resources and the EU's ability to have both the capacity and coordination to respond, it's an interesting idea. But for me, the biggest concern, of course, there is, again, how are we distributing funding? How are we distributing prioritization? And how are we ensuring that certain crises aren't politicized? Because I think very well, as we know, they likely would be. And this is kind of, to answer the second question, is the challenge I see is that in embedding, while these principles of the Green Deal are, let's say, narratively more embedded within these different policy domains, I think in practice, it's not necessarily, the talk isn't being walked, and instead it's coming off as a bit of tokenistic, a way of just throwing in buzzwords without necessarily coming coming up with an actual tangible roadmap like the 24 climate target proposal that shows how it can actually be done and how these policy silos can be broken.
Yeah, I think generally, the Commission's strategies are quite interlinked. I think there is an understanding that a lot of these topics are interlinked. Mainstreaming defense, also green considerations. I think it's you see that across the output of the Commission. I think the problem is rather in the end, how do you finance that, and where do you then prioritize, right? So because as I mentioned before, the issue is that we don't. How are we going to fill those 800 billions in investment gap that Draghi talks about? And for that, you will have to make painful trade-offs. And I think it seems to me now the Commission uses the two main the main two goals. It follows the security and competitiveness, and that will probably mean that there will be less money for the green agenda, but also for the social agenda. I think you can combine them in some ways, but of course it doesn't replace a fully fledged funding strategy for those areas too. And but yeah, I mean, as you said before, for example, when it comes to defense, the social aspect is also important. I think also regional policy is something that it gets a lot under pressure lately. When we talk about the competitiveness fund, where does it get the money from? I mean, the two biggest parts of the budgets are cohesion and agricultural funds, right? So some of that will probably have to be redistributed. At least, I mean, member states will probably not like it, and I'm not sure how far we can actually go that way. But that, I mean, it should be done. So it really needs to. There needs to be an idea how you still manage to take those concerns also into account. And again, when you talk about defense, I think, but also when you talk about the clean energy transition, I think there is great potential also for regional development in there. And so that needs to be maybe further spelled out, but in the end of the day, it's about finance and prioritization, and we'll see in the next months and years how that will turn out. But that's very much depending on the political dynamics.
Thanks, Eric. Agree what colleagues are sharing. In fact, the objective, even the way the Commission is organized in terms of the portfolios, there already I see streamlining. I mean, there is an assessment that maybe von der Leyen is trying to have a greater control and grip of which might be the case, but at the very fact that defense space is one commissioner's portfolios, another vice president Virkkunen has security, for example, then there is a preparedness, even a third commissioner. At the same time, it shows that we're all part of the same objective and picture, and we have it is all a teamwork. Now, the reason why I don't particularly like trade-offs, the wording, is it looks as if everything has to be, if certain priority or policies prioritize, it is certainly at the expense of another. I think EU in itself is a whole trade-off concept, and it is developing as we go, and we need to respond to the challenges that we're facing. We are at war right now. Our infrastructure is being attacked. Migrants are being weaponized. Perhaps we don't have yet armed aggression, but we have cyber attacks, major cyber attacks. Our intelligence authorities are saying that we might be at war in 3 to 4 years. So certainly this has to be a priority. Climate is another massive priority. Now, because we invest more in security, do we really have to not invest enough in climate? I don't know. I think we have enough resources. In 2024, combined GDP of the EU is about $19 trillion. That's quite a lot. We are the world's biggest single market. So indeed, it will be prioritization, but certain priorities, I think, have to be streamlined, like climate, like security, like competitiveness and innovation. They have to be engineered and seen within wider horizontal policy areas. where I would like to agree with Philipp very much is next MFF will be very important. A third of EU's budget is going to agriculture, a third of EU's budget is going to territorial cohesion. So I think it is important, to reflect where do these priorities also stand when it comes to the very dire threats that we are facing today, and where we'll need to have compromises.
So actually, that was my last question to you before giving the microphone to the audience. You mentioned the communication of the Commission on its ideas for the next MFF. And there is one major idea, which is going from a program-oriented to a project-oriented EU budget, with a restructuring of the lines of spending. So from your point of view, and that's what Maria started to mention, from your point of view, would such a new MFF, if it happens, because it needs the approval of the member states, the agreement of the member states, but would that kind of thinking to restructure the MFF be an opportunity to have a more efficient use of EU money and increase or improve the connection between all the policies which we have been discussing so far? So, Philipp, because you're the budget expert here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that should be the goal, and the Commission seems to be going in that direction. I think it really depends on this competitiveness fund, what it's going to look like, how much of different programs can be actually put together.
Just sorry, do we have an indicative amount of this fund, or is it just an idea?
I didn't hear much about that, but I think it should be a major part of the budget. I mean, it should be, yeah, it should be very substantial. And I think it comes down to how do you really leverage that money in a way that it has most impact? How do you make sure that this actually, crowds in private investment? Because, as I said before, public resources, especially at the EU level, are limited. So you need to crowd in private investment. You need to crowd in member state investment. You need to crowd in the investment from, from abroad, but also from, national promotional banks and so on. And I think the Competitiveness Fund should be the focal point of this effort. So what I've been looking at as well while studying and trying to develop solutions for this is also the Chinese model. And of course, the Chinese model is very state-centric, but it has also some things that might be useful also in a European context. So how it's done in China is that you have these government guidance funds, huge funds that act as a sort of mother fund, and then you have sub-funds in particular strategic areas, whether that's batteries, whether it's AI or whatever. And so the mother fund gives equity and risk alleviation to those sub-funds, but these sub-funds are open to private investments, to regional investments, and so on and so on. So the idea is really to build a public-private financing architecture that's potent, that can deliver investments also in risky businesses, in risky projects. I'm talking about infrastructure, energy infrastructure, connectivity infrastructure, space, which is going to be increasingly important, looking at what's happening with Starlink and so on. But also, innovation, breakthrough innovation that, we don't have the VC, venture capital, we don't have that ecosystem like the Americans. The Chinese don't have it either, but they manage to sort of draw in, decrease the risk through, having a lot of leading public funding in those sub-funds, then pulling in the others as well. In China, you have even American Silicon Valley firms being part of these sub-funds. I mean, because it's so attractive, and it really, first of all, it leads the way, shows where there could be, it's secure to invest, but also it alleviates the risk. And I think something like that could work in the EU as well. And you could make it, you could have sub-funds with national compartments like in InvestEU, where you have national promotional banks shooting money in there. I mean, in the end of the day, it's really about, you know, de-risking as much as possible in those fields where the EU budget now doesn't really make a difference. And if you look at InvestEU, I mean, it's a great program, but the really important added value, EU added value issues, whether it's infrastructure, whether it's breakthrough innovation, it doesn't really make a difference. And I think that is where this fund needs to really come in. And one structure could be, yeah, having these sub funds in all these strategic areas, and then really merging that with private finance, with regional international finance, and building ecosystems. That could be informed, for example, by the industrial alliances that exist. You know, you have the battery alliance and so on, that really connect the industry with policymakers, with academia and so on. So you would have to really, you know, put all of these different actors together and get the most out of it. I think that should be the way forward.
Thank you, Philipp. Brooke, do you see these ideas around the next MFF as an opportunity to mainstream green policies, or on the contrary, as a risk of deprioritizing further the green ambitions?
Yeah, I think of course it's an opportunity, but will this opportunity be capitalized on? I don't think so. I think unfortunately it will be a reshuffling, and I think this reshuffling will indicate where the priorities, and it's incredibly frustrating if we're talking about, you know, the fact that we need to be increasing spending for defense because war is on the horizon, etc. I mean, I don't doubt this, but it feels crazy that people are dying today from climate change already, and yet we still can't seem to prioritize putting the necessary funds towards things like adaptation. And yes, I know, you know, we talk about clean energy because it has such an easy cohesion with competitiveness, because it's an easy narrative to sell, and you know, it is important, but there is so much beyond this that we are just so missing the mark on, and it's drastically underfunded, and yet it likely won't be. I mean, this competitiveness compass, I mean, it is, let's say, the North Star of where we're going, and it's really missing the mark. We're already not on track to meet the 2030 targets. Again, I'll go back to this, you know, I think what will be really critical is to see this proposal for the 2040 climate targets, because this, in theory, should go beyond just decarbonization to have milestones for other aspects of sustainability. And I think it will be a really important indicator for where we stand. Beyond this, I think CTIPs, et cetera, will be really interesting to see how that unfolds. For me, the international dimension, it's quite important. CTIPs, this furthering of free trade agreements that you see in the clean industrial deal, et cetera, this is an acknowledgement of the EU's strategic risk for the reputational damage that the EU has faced. I mean, when it comes to issues of extractivism and exploitative use of leveraging market power when it comes to free trade agreements, like was seen with the earlier drafts of the EU-Chile trade agreement. These are really important. This also extends, of course, beyond to multilateralism and climate financing, because the countries that are on the receiving end of these initiatives, like those in Latin America, in Northern Africa, et cetera, are also strategically imperative for the EU's own competitiveness and security agendas. And its ability to set forth, you know, stay the course domestically, but then also, let's say, remedy its standing at the global, you know, at the global stage is quite imperative for sending signals to those partners who the EU relies on so much.
You want to add something?
Sure, I think it's very important indeed to explore how to leverage the impact for the next MFF. I think, you know, one of the easiest options, of course, to have more money. And another option is, of course, to better combine different sources of funding and financing. I mean, at the same time, things are moving very fast. You know, we might also have by the end of this year a massive world rearmament bank for defense and security, which could also take away a little bit of pressure, perhaps, from the EU countries. I mean, remains to be seen. But I think it is important to acknowledge that defense security will remain a priority in the next MFF, I think alongside climate competitiveness as well. And for me, the problem is not so much of resources. For me, the problem is lack of courage. I think we do have enough resources. I think we are lacking political will. We're also very used to having a very comfortable life in Europe. And that's, again, most of us are born in the EU, most of us are born in NATO, most of us are born and take security, or absence of emergencies and crises for granted. And that's great. I mean, that's fantastic. But we need to also think, what type of union we want 10, 15 years down the line. And hopefully not just the one who's able to, just respond just in time for crisis, but hopefully one that is also thriving. So despite the fact that we are, in very difficult situation, maybe we should also dare to dream a little bit and also see what more we could do and how, because I think it's a matter of courage. Thank you.
So we have our colleague Tabea with the microphone. So if you want to ask a question, we will take 2 or 3 questions. Please introduce yourself, ask your question, and then we will see if we have time for a second round. So who wants to start? Then, yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Maurice Peterson from Statkraft, Norwegian energy company, but operating all across Europe. I have 2 questions, one on defense and one more on maybe the competitiveness agenda. On defense, it's kind of about the leadership of the EU on the world international stage. So we've seen that the UK and Keir Starmer, they have taken kind of on to some extent this leadership that maybe the US has been left open to grab for someone. And so in this context, how do you see the relationship between EU and UK, especially in this defense area, to develop in the future? Will they be able to kind of include also non-EU member states, UK, of course, first and foremost, but potentially also Norway or others? So that's the defense question. And on competitiveness, I would be interested in hearing your views on the effect of the looming trade war on competitiveness. Of course, this is probably still highly speculation, but would be interested to hear kind of how you see the EU react there and how they might maybe also need to reshuffle it a little bit against this new threat. Thank you.
Thank you. We had a second question just behind.
Make that easy. So I'm Stephen Webb from Knowledge Rights 21, which is an organization that works to support access to research. I think the initial shots being fired, upholders, I'm going to use lots of defense metaphors here. Initial shots being fired about the MFF have seen quite a sort of, I don't know, defensive reaction from the research community. There's certainly been worries about the framework program being cannibalized for the competitiveness fund, and there's certainly questions about to what extent money will be pushed into defense, which I think is creating an unpleasant and unhelpful zero-sum game discussion at the moment. And I suppose turning that into the question, within the Draghi report, within the letter report, there is this quite strong focus on research and on the fifth freedom. It's not something that we feel has really come out in some of the statements, in some of the documents that commissioners other than Commissioner Zaharie have actually been talking about. To what extent do you have the sense that research and the fifth freedom are properly being integrated into discussions around competitiveness, or is this just a good buzzword?
Thanks. And we have a last question at the back, or a last for this first round.
Thank you. It's on. Hello. Thank you very much. My name is Thomas Meyer. I'm from the Swiss representation in Brussels. And my question goes mainly to Brooke. And I was wondering, you mentioned that the drive to decarbonize the industry is still going ahead, but on the nature side of the environmental protection that we need to do, there's a lack of action. And could we say that in the industrial side, we have managed to create the business case, the economic incentives to and found an approach to decarbonize, but that business case is still lacking on the side of the nature. And I was also wondering, the water resilience strategy from the Commission could be counted as a adaptation, maybe not yet a measure, but adaptation strategy. What do you expect from this water resilience strategy? Thank you very much.
Thank you. So first, Maria on UK and EU, then Philipp, and then Brooke.
Thank you very much for all these excellent questions. Indeed, both the EU and UK are indispensable to European defence and security, especially in times of war. There have been an emergence of new frameworks of cooperation, actually. Like, you know, E5, where we have France, Germany, UK, Poland, and Italy discussing together the current security situation. There are also coalitions of the willing discussing possible, you know, supply of security guarantees, most likely in the form of troops to Ukraine. But when it comes to EU and UK, indeed, UK as a third country is so far, as it currently stands, it's still subject to negotiations, is not part of the Commission's initiatives. That said, there are talks about finding an agreement, a comprehensive, robust agreement on EU-UK cooperation in defence and security. With regard to Norway, well, Norway, as part of European Economic Area, has access to the single market and is able to make use of the REARM Plan for Europe instruments that the Commission is putting forward. Now, this is also an important message for the UK, because indeed, as was said in one of the events at the EPC, one area where the UK has always wanted to cooperate with the EU was single market. So perhaps if we are moving or creating a common market for defence, this is also one of the ways to entice the United Kingdom. Now, just to bridge a little bit with the research innovation question, because this is where the UK is vitally important. I mean, it's one of the biggest military powers in Europe. New technologies and innovation, the UK is one of the leading countries as well, where it doesn't surprise that UK came back to Horizon Europe. And now UK will be preparing for the next MFF negotiations for the FP4. And in fact, defense and innovation, new technologies is a very important combination. And there I would like to see convergence in, you know, having a comprehensive defense security partnership between EU and UK, not only in terms of hardcore defense, but also in terms of innovation and softer skills, whereby you need potentially a movement of researchers for the purpose of innovation. So next MFF is a great opportunity for the EU-UK for defense, but also for research and innovation. Thank you.
Yeah, also from my side, thanks for the question. Yeah, on the trade war, I mean, that of course is one of the key problems that Europe is facing now, and it's especially the uncertainty of it. But the Commission, of course, has developed or upgraded their defense potential when it comes to trade defense. They're ready to use it. I think in the end of the day, it comes down again to member states. I think we've seen recently the reaction of the EU to the aluminium and steel tariffs of the US was then countered by Trump with a 200% proposal against wine and so on. And I think that will be the test now, how serious one can be in really retaliating. And I really see the danger here that, you know, there is that outside players are going to play us one by one, the different member states, and make sure that we don't react strong enough. That's my fear. I hope it's not the case. But I also think, you know, with the US tariffs against China, the pressure from China will become even larger when it comes to, you know, excess production they have. So something will have to happen there too. And that's not going to be easy because that's the second large market that we depend on also for exports. So there's big potential there for escalation too. I think what should be done is sort of try to get the Chinese, and I mean this is something that's already being done, but should be done more, is to convince them to really build factories in Europe, share knowledge, all the stuff that the Europeans have done in China 20 years ago. They should do that with the Chinese too. And how to react apart from that, I think, yeah, you need to look outside China and US much more. And yeah, the Commission is doing that, but it needs to go down that road forcefully when it comes to FTAs. I mean, Mercosur is super important that that goes through now through the Council, but also other countries like India. I think there's much more space there. I mean, there are negotiations, it takes time. And of course, strengthening the single market, because I think there's been some research results that said that if we completely decouple from China and Russia, like 100%, that could be offset by a more integrated single market multiple times. So I think that the potential that's there in the single market to really for demand, but also for supply and also for demand is immense. So there will have to be a focus on really pushing domestic demand, and that you do, of course, through investment and also through decreasing barriers. And the German investment push, I think, is a good step in the right direction, considering Germany has been the sort of poster child of this sort of export focus and neglecting demand. So I think that's going in the right direction, but it's a complex topic, and we will see what happens. But yeah, then the question on research. I mean, I've seen there was some sort of leaked document from the Commission on the Competitiveness Fund, and it's sort of there was the idea to have Horizon as part of that. How that looks in practice, I don't know. It seems to me, in general, there is sort of a focus now to say we have great research at universities, we have great foundational research, but we don't know how to make business out of it, how to scale it up. So I expect the Commission to put the emphasis a bit more on that. Of course, there's danger that while having great research now, this might go down. I don't know, but I fear that could be sort of the development. And in some ways, again, you need to prioritize. But what's clear is you need to focus more on really scaling up breakthrough research. And I think Draghi talks about the EIC a lot. Focusing, copying this sort of ARPA model that the United States has. So I think there's a lot of potential there, but there are also pitfalls, and that's the ones that you mentioned. And time will tell how much that is going to materialize also in the proposal for competitiveness fund. And yeah, I think that was it. No.
Yeah. Then it was decarbonation and water for Brooke.
Ready. I mean, thank you as well for the question. And I think when we're talking about a business case, we're getting there. I think the Clean Industrial Deal was a milestone in this regard. There are, of course, some contradictions like discussed earlier. I think the omnibus simplification package makes it a little bit of an unclear investment climate, doesn't necessarily help. I think the state aid framework revisions therein would be interesting to see within this regard as well. Another one is the Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act. I mean, I have my own hesitations on it when we're discussing environmental and social safeguards and the ability to maintain them, of course, and its tension with nature protection. But of course, the Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act is intended to streamline and speed up the permitting processes for select projects, so industry access to clean energy and industrial decarbonization. So I think that will be, let's say, making a business case as well. When it comes to the CID, it also pushes more on the demand side. So public procurement, and then also, again, going back to this Industrial Decarbonization Accelerator Act, it's pushing for a voluntary carbon intensity label that will start with steel in 2025. It's also introducing sustainability and resilience indicators to help, let's say, encourage the uptake of EU-made clean products. A lot of these are voluntary, so again, the efficacy of these, I think, is quite questionable, but again, it is a start in the right direction. When we're talking about nature, I mean, no. I would say the business case has clearly not been made, but I don't also think that there's any really attempt to do that. In the vision for agriculture, you see a little bit of conversation around these market-based incentives, so nature credits, et cetera. I mean, these are incredibly problematic. And so while maybe there's an attempt to make the business case, I don't necessarily personally think that we're going about things in the right way. And it's not the ability to, let's say, account for the greater picture, which is, again, the need for biodiversity, for the longevity of our food system, et cetera, is kind of lacking there within. Nature credits and biodiversity credits alone are not going to be able to kind of push the marker in this regard. To go to your question about the water resilience strategy, though, to be honest, I can't speak too much about this. Without a doubt, it is, of course, closely interlinked with adaptation. And I think alongside the adaptation plan that's expected next year, it will be an interesting progression. Ever since the 2021 EU adaptation strategy, haven't seen as much progress within this dimension as we should have been seeing. With that said, I think what can be expected, again, when we're talking about the EU's role within this, is addressing the knowledge gap and facilitating knowledge sharing, particularly across regions, especially when we're talking about the need to scale up infrastructure and the innovation there within. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. We have time for one last very short question and very short answer if someone wants. So we will be covered. Maybe as a conclusion, sorry, there is one? Oh, yes, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Victoria Petrova from the European Commission, DG Move. If you were in the Commission, in the college, what will be your one and only proposal for the next MFF in your areas?
Very good one. Is inspired first.
I can start. I think I said most of this already, but I think, yeah, to get the competitiveness compass right, competitiveness fund right, large enough, and with the right leverage and the right focus.
Maria?
Courage. I would like to see more courage from European Commission in defense and security, as well as to actively prepare for worst case scenarios across the spectrum. And those worst case scenarios should be bold in a sense that, since we don't know what's the long-term strategy of the United States, EU's capability targets and capability gaps, as well as NATO's capability targets, should prepare for the scenario of what we would do in case there is minimal or no support from the US. And I would very much invite the Commission to link military defense and civil defense. I think it's vitally important that we're not just talking weapons, which are absolutely critical, to defend ourselves in case of armed aggression, but we need to have conversations with the people. This is why I'm looking also very much forward for the Preparedness Union. But it should be one and the same military defense expenditure, military and civil defense expenditure, military civil defense approach to whatever we do in defense and security. Thank you.
And last word to Brooke.
I mean, I think within my field, if we're talking about money, for me, the sheer amount that's going to cap, if the next cap is going to be incredibly incentives based, I think that is, in my opinion, maybe this is a hot take, I would say that it needs to be less incentives based and more money towards things like nature-based solutions and mandatory. Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for your attention and for your questions. There would be much more to unpack, I guess, but there will be other discussions and debate here in this room. You can check our event calendar on our website. Thanks to my great colleagues, Philipp, Brooke, and Maria. And I wish you all a good weekend. Goodbye.